I already wasted extra 5 minutes, so I have nothing to add. Instead, I will introduce the 5 world-renowned, distinguished panelists this morning. I have some problems in deciding the order of presentation, but I made a conclusion that the more hours flight, the sooner he will present. So I think 15 hours flight, Aikenbery should be the first one. And then Singapore, my friends. and then Japan, China, and Korea. So if you agree with me, okay, I will do that. Yeah. So actually, I'd like to have some more interactive dialogue, but given the popularity and the aspiration of our audience, large turnout audience, to listen to directly what he is thinking about, I will give them 10 to 15 minutes. And then after they finish their respective presentation, I will give another 3 to 5 minutes to respond some further questions, to be raised among during the first initial presentation. So after the second round presentation, and I will open the floors. In accordance with our practice of our foundation, please write down your questions in the papers, and my staff will collect so that we could cover as many questions in that way. So without further ado, I'd like to invite John. Okay. You have the floors.
Thank you, President Park. It's an honor to be here, to be part of this panel of distinguished thinkers, and I look forward to their comments and to your questions. And Professor Kim, it's a pleasure to be working with Korea University as well on this, what is the 9th year of this 5-university collaboration. So it's an honor to be here and to be at this Institute for Advanced Study. I do come from Princeton, and across town there we have the Institute for Advanced Study, which, as the president said, was the model for this institute. And it's interesting, the very first senior fellow or faculty member at our institute was Albert Einstein. And of course, he was the father, you might say, of the technology that we're grappling with today, nuclear energy. But he also was, in his latter years, a serious student of politics, and among his many efforts were collaborations with the atomic scientists, who formed a kind of cohort of scientists during the research period of World War II, pushing forward an agenda for arms control and disarmament. So it's in that spirit, and it's quite appropriate that we're here at the Korean Institute for Advanced Study. I think there's wide agreement that the crisis with North Korea is becoming more dangerous. Everyone agrees that the situation is alarming. The president said it's not just a conundrum, it's a catastrophe, and I think we all agree with that. The dangers have grown in recent weeks and months for a major miscalculation, for possibility of war, and it's probably more of that sort, a tinderbox for violence, more of that sort than we've seen for decades. The core of the problem is remarkably, even stunningly simple. North Korea is determined to become a nuclear state, a nuclear power, and the other countries in the region are determined that they don't become such a power. Therein lies the difficulty. As North Korea continues to build its capability, it unleashes more and more tension and threat across the region, and increasingly in the United States. It creates new and more complex ways in which the countries from South Korea, Japan, China, the United States and Russia, and the wider world thinks about this threat. And indeed, from the perspective of the US-South Korean alliance, as North Korea gains a greater capability to threaten to attack North America with an intercontinental ballistic missile tipped with a nuclear weapon, it creates a vibration in the alliance by provoking thoughts of divisibility of alliance interests, that will the United States be a patron of the alliance and live up to its guarantee of extended deterrence, or will there be these moments where the U.S. sees the threat different from the way the South Korean partners see the threat? And so this becomes, with every day, a greater possibility. Indeed, the Trump administration has explicitly said if diplomacy fails, they will act to eliminate the threat. What that means, the circumstances of that sort are not clear, but clearly they have signaled emphatically, more emphatically than you could imagine, that the use of force is still on the table. Listen to Lindsey Graham talk about this in his characterization of what he thinks the president means when he says this will not stand, that this has to be a threat that will be eliminated, not lived with. Most of the U.S. national security establishment has started to make a transition from seeing North Korea as a proliferation problem, and increasingly it is seen as a deterrence problem. But the Trump administration is not there yet, and it's not clear that they will be there. The crisis is further inflamed by the personalities and behaviors of leaders in the region, not least North Korea and perhaps from my country, new leaders, ones that are not necessarily experienced, that may have more so than the predecessors a kind of risk-prone behavior, more willing to think about extreme cases and think outside of the box and not necessarily gravitate to cautious management of the problem. There are very few leaders in the region that we would describe as Bismarcks or Gorbachevs or Reagans or Obamas. Such leadership is in short supply. Trump, indeed, President Trump has unfortunately undermined some of the moral high ground that I think the United States and the wider set of countries looking at North Korea have commanded over the decades in talking about, in quite dramatic language, unleashing fire and fury, the likes of which the world has never seen, and threatening to totally destroy North Korea. So there is a kind of a looseness of talk, a kind of rhetoric, a kind of personalization. It's me against him that is not creating circumstances that reduce tension and create possibilities for management. And of course, the wider situation also is making matters difficult because, as I think the president also said, we're in the midst of a wider regional transformation, what I have described as a transformation from a hegemonic order to a more traditional, partially at least, balance of power order, which requires very different calculations, different kinds of diplomacy, and certainly a lot of efforts to manage power shifts and look for new equilibriums for security cooperation in the region. So that we seem to be coming to a turning point. We can see different futures in front of us. We can see one, perhaps a last chance for a nuclear deal, setting the stage for a wider regional arms control effort. Or on the other hand, we could see even short of a war, which of course could happen, we could see a nuclear-armed North Korea that persists, that destabilizes the region, provoking the Republic of Korea and Japan to talk about and think about the nuclear option themselves. So there's a lot at stake here, and time doesn't necessarily mean that it will be on our side. But can we think, going forward, about managing this problem? If the problem can't be solved, no one has a silver bullet. Can there be steps that can be taken to manage the problem? Here's where I would say there is some good news, and that good news is that the international community is remarkably unanimous that North Korea and the Korean Peninsula should be free of nuclear weapons. There have been 16 United Nations Security Council resolutions that have set down the law on what we expect North Korea to do. All the great powers, China, Russia, the United States, the Europeans, Japan, South Korea, agree on the vision that there should be a region that should be free of these capabilities that North Korea is building. The bad news is, of course, that North Korea does not seem to be willing to bend to pressure, although more pressure certainly could be and should be applied, but unresponsive to carrots and sticks. So in my view, we need to slow down a little bit here and play for the long term. Various people have said strategic patience has failed. We've got to find a solution. That's dangerous in my view. We should rather be thinking about recalibrating what I would call a strategy of persistence, strategic persistence, containing the threat, playing for time, reducing tensions that can feed miscalculation and risk-taking. The key, in my view, is to shift the dynamic from a North Korea versus the US, or even more pernicious, Kim Jong-un versus Trump, to a wider region and a wider regional response to North Korea. Keep the denuclearization goal always alive, never give up. So it seems to me that there are three thoughts that would follow from this view about how we might make fumbling efforts, at least, to make some progress. One is simply to pursue options using all the instruments that we have available to us. This would include deterrence, to make it clear to North Korea that having nuclear weapons is not necessarily going to make your day. It's difficult, it's risky, there are demands that the outside world will be, and that every nuclear power that has ever come into being has had to, in effect, implicitly agree that they are in cooperative relationships with the outside world to prevent those weapons from being used. Deterrence. Containment. Containment along all these different dimensions of containing the spread of technology, containing the influence of North Korea, sealing North Korea up, if you will. Sanctions. Number three. Sanctions have to be pursued with increasing vigor, including more work from China. Keep a nuclear North Korea in a box. Limit their international exposure. Prevent WMD from leaking. But sanctions have to be understood as the way the international community has seen them for almost 2 centuries now. The idea of sanctions emerged really in the 19th century. In large part with the international peace movement, looking for instruments short of war to put pressure on behavior that threatens war, that threatens aggression, and tools with sanctions that can be pursued without the use of war. So sanctions are a friend. Dialogue, talk is not something, it's not a concession. And then finally, continue to talk about the off-ramp. Yes, there's going to be more pressure on North Korea. Yes, all the options are on the table, but there's always going to have to be someone who is making clear to North Korea that there is an off-ramp, there is an option. The old bargain that I remember Secretary of Defense Perry pursued and articulated at the end of the Clinton administration, that there is a chance that North Korea can live peacefully with its neighbors. It entails denuclearization on its part in a phased, verifiable way that will include reciprocity of extending more normalized behavior from those that live around North Korea. So pursue those options. And just very quickly, secondly, push for a G5 approach. The multilateral front needs to be reactivated. It may not be a bargain that the Russians and the Chinese have offered, a freeze for a freeze, but experiment a little bit. Take some risks on the side of diplomacy. I suggest not a freeze for a freeze, because that's a concession on North Korea not to do something that's illegal for the United States and Korea to do something that is legal, namely to engage in military exercises that are there precisely because North Korea is doing what it's doing. But you can make steps. We do 2 exercises a year, do 1 a year and see what happens. Nothing might happen. They might continue the test, but it gives you the moral high ground that you are looking for signals of a kind of security dilemma solution where you make reciprocal gestures and see what the other side does. And finally, very quickly lay the foundation for a wider settlement in the region, make the other states in the region stakeholders in a regime of deterrence and containment and sanctions by continuing to talk about what the region could look like. The topics that our group has been talking about amongst ourselves, the 5 university dialoguers for 9 years now, looking for ways to think creatively about security cooperation, assurances coming in all directions about what a more peaceful and non-nuclear peninsula would look like, and thinking again the way we did when the 6-party talks were in operation. They were abandoned in 2009, of architecture, a Northeast Asian security architecture. That puts everybody on one side and North Korea on the other. And that's the kind of leverage that, in the long run, I think can solve this problem peacefully. Thank you.
Thank you. Very succinct and comprehensive, the analysis, especially based on mid and long-term, perspective. I want to just pick up one word which drove my attention is to prevent some measure to prevent miscalculation. So that is very important even whenever we have some crisis. So I think China and the U.S. has good experience a couple of years ago when they dealt with the South China Sea maritime dispute. At that time, some measures to prevent any miscalculation or any unintentional military escalation. So maybe during the second round, Professor Jin Guo, you might have some additional comment on that possibility, on how we could prevention of miscalculation. Next speaker will be Kishore Mabubani. He's currently working as the Dean of the Yigan New School of Public Policy of the National University of Singapore. Actually, he's the most distinguished, representative of the Singaporean, the intellectual society. So every week he awaken in the morning with stimulating ideas. So I hope you will share your great ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Park, for that very, very generous introduction. And let me begin by saying that it's a great honor and privilege to be invited to your foundation and to join this group for discussion. And of course, I want to begin by agreeing with everyone that we are dealing with a very, very dangerous situation. And I think we all agree that we should condemn North Korea for all its violations of international law, for the nuclear and missile test it's carrying out in violation of UN Security Council decisions. So I think on that fundamental point, we are all agreed. And at the same time, I also want to say that I want to pay a tribute, given how dangerous the situation is. I'm amazed how calm the citizens of Seoul are in the face of this danger. When I came here, my friends in Singapore said, Kishore, is it okay? Is it safe to go to Seoul or not? You may be attacked tomorrow. And the danger was actually highlighted only yesterday when the US ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, said, and I read this in the Huffington Post yesterday, she said that the US may not participate in the Winter Games in Pyeongchang because it's too dangerous. So she's worried about a few US athletes losing their lives. But there are, 10 million Seoul citizens living daily under threat. So I must say, I really admire your calm and your composure. So I think in that spirit, given how dangerous the situation is, I would say that the more dangerous the situation is, the calmer we have to be in our analysis. And the worst thing we can do is to get hysterical and take very strident positions, because that may only make the situation worse. So in the spirit of trying to provide a calm analysis, and I must emphasize, I'm not a Korean expert, but of course I watch it like anybody else, I would make three fundamental points about the North Korean challenge. First one is that there is no military solution. And this is something, of course, as you know, that's now debatable, but we can discuss that. Two, the record shows there's a great limit to what unilateral sanctions can do against North Korea. Multilateral sanctions are different. Security Council sanctions, universally adopted, universally implemented, are different. Unilateral sanctions, there's a limit to what can be done. And third, at the end of the day, and to some extent I'm echoing what John said at the end, you cannot give up on the diplomatic solution. So I will try and elaborate these 3 points very quickly. The first one, of course, it has to be emphasized that there is no military solution because the costs are too high. And you, the citizens of Seoul, know this better than anyone does. If a war begins tomorrow, maybe 1/3 to half the people in this room will be directly affected or killed in this exercise. And very senior analysts like Jonathan Pollack, my good friend, I was just reading an article by Todd Rosenblum, who was an Obama negotiator on the North Korean issue. They all say emphatically that there is no military solution because the costs will be too high. And I want to say, by the way, I actually happen to be someone who has lived through war. I lived for 1 year in the city of Phnom Penh, Cambodia in 1973-74. And almost every day when I was in Phnom Penh, the city was shelled, either by rockets or by artillery fire. And I've seen at first hand bodies being cut up by artillery falling on city streets. I've seen the bodies. I know how horrible war can be. So all those who speak about, the military option is still on the table, I think they should be very careful what they speak about. They should figure out what the costs are before they decide it can be done. And that's why I think once we decide that the military solution is not there, we then have to look for the alternative solution. The second solution, of course, is in theory to apply more sanctions. Now, John mentioned Einstein. There's a famous quote that is at least actually attributed to Einstein. Einstein says, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I would say if you look at the history of sanctions, North Korea has been subject to sanctions for decades. And if you know, the record shows that the sanctions have not succeeded in moving them. And here too, by the way, I know in theory sanctions are supposed to be a good thing, but in practice, often they do not work. And I'll give you 2 recent case studies, okay? This is what I tried to document in my book, The ASEAN Miracle. There were 2 regimes, 2 military regimes that were in power for a long time. One was Syria, one was Myanmar. Syria was subject to sanctions, isolation, cut off from the world, and you see the mess that there is in Syria. Myanmar was subject to Western sanctions, but Myanmar was admitted by its Southeast Asian neighbors to ASEAN to a gradual process of engagement. Myanmar changed. Myanmar is not perfect, but at least you can see you can have a peaceful transformation of a long-standing regime through engagement. And that's why you have to do case studies on what sanctions work and what sanctions don't work. And at the same time, quite often, and this is of course a very slightly delicate point, many countries impose sanctions not because they believe the sanctions will work. They know the sanctions will not work. It's not about doing good, it's about feeling good. It's about saying, okay, I've done something, I've taken a stand against North Korea. But that sort of thing, at the end of the day, it makes you feel good, but it doesn't achieve anything. And at the same time, if the sanctions are not coordinated, they will create problems too. Now, I'm going to refer, by the way, to, unfortunately, a book you cannot buy off Google. There's a very famous Chinese diplomat, Madame Fu Ying, who just came out with a privately published book called The Korean Nuclear Issue, Past, Present, and Future, a Chinese Perspective. Now, there, of course, you may not agree with her point of view, but she provides a series of facts which are actually quite amazing if you read them. For example, she points out in 2005, when progress was being made in the negotiations with North Korea, the State Department was succeeding in its talks. The Treasury Department came out with sanctions against the Bank of Macau and its links with North Korea. And she explains how that affected the negotiations vis-a-vis North Korea. The reason I say this is that when you have sanctions, think about the larger impact that the sanctions have, and not just them, you do them unilaterally. Of course, multilateral sanctions should continue, and we all know in this room that there's only one sanction that will work for sure, and that is for China to cut off all its links with North Korea, and certainly cut off all its oil supplies to North Korea, and North Korea cannot survive. That's very clear. There is a solution. But the question is, how do you persuade China to carry out this total strike against North Korea and then be the only country that suffers the consequences when North Korean refugees go to China? How is it in China's incentive to try and carry out such a sanction like that? That's got to be factored in too. So for that reason, I think we still have to go back to diplomacy. And I say this as someone who was a diplomat for 33 years. At the end of the day, actually diplomacy can work. But it can work if you make an effort to understand what is it that the other party wants. For example, why is North Korea pushing so hard to acquire nuclear weapons? Is it because it wants to use these nuclear weapons to go out and conquer the world, to destroy its neighbors? Or is it part of an effort to secure regime security? Now, over the years, clearly, there have been various efforts to try and give assurances to North Korea that we're not out to destroy your regime. But when you keep talking of regime change together with denuclearization, it creates conflicting signals. And every time you mention regime change, you increase the incentives for the nuclear program. And in this book, again, Madame Fu Ying points out that one event had a very profound effect on the North Korean regime. And that was what happened to Libya. Because as you know, Libya, Muammar Gaddafi gave up his nuclear program, and he was given an assurance that there would be no regime change, that he'd be protected. Some years pass, and as you know, what happened to Libya. And apparently, what happened in Libya had a very profound effect on the North Korean regime and made them think, hey, how do we protect ourselves? So that's why it's important to enter the psychology. And if you can enter their psychology and to say, okay, what is it we need to do to persuade them to give up their nuclear weapons? What is it that they actually want? And can we provide something that will give them an incentive to give up their nuclear weapons, or to freeze them, or to have a rollback? So at the end of the day, if there is no military solution, and if you want to have a diplomatic solution, you have to make an effort to understand the party that you're negotiating with and see what can we do to give them an incentive to roll back from their hardline position. It may not be easy, But history teaches us that even in the most difficult situations, if you try very hard to carry out patient and careful diplomacy, you might still be able to find a solution.
Thank you for your great knowledge and intuition, as always the case. If I just say just one thing on the regime change issues, our president already made it clear after he took office that there's no intention of South government, South Korea, to make try any regime changes. And even in this room, most of our Korean citizens do not want regime changes. We want peaceful coexistence, pursuing co-prosperity. So maybe I don't think North Korea will insist on their nuclear programming based on our intention to make regime changes. So still have there many questions on what is their real intention. But I don't know what is your intention. But if you have more weight on this, regime, survival of the North Korean system. But in that case, we have a natural question: why they develop ICBM? Medium-range missile is enough. But in case of the Pakistan, they don't have to develop ICBM to secure their survival. So maybe I wonder if you could have some more saying on that argument, during our second round talk. Next speaker will be Professor Kiichi Fujiwara from Tokyo University. It's not easy, recently it's not easy for us to listen to, Japanese voice. But I think it's a very good, chance for us to have some carefully listen to, Japanese intellectual voice. Welcome.
Thank you, Ambassador Park. I'm not sure if I can claim to be representative of a Japanese voice, in spite of the fact that I am an ethnic Japanese. So, and if I don't sound Japanese to you, then I owe you an apology for that. But I don't think I can change that. Things are bad, and I don't think I have to repeat what the two excellent speakers before me told you. As a matter of fact, we don't have to tell you anything about the apparent geopolitical crisis that we're placed. To sum up some of the important points, one is that deterrence will be insufficient in changing the behavior of the North Korean government. Just traditional deterrence strategy will not bring about desired changes in, like, for example, giving up missile tests or giving up their development of further nuclear warheads, and it's unlikely to happen. The second point is that economic sanctions so far has also failed to change their behavior. There has been significant developments, like, for example, the control of coal supply, coal trade with North Korea. I think there was a movement, but was insufficient in changing the behavior of North Korea. So, to put it very simply, traditional strategies have not been successful, and that leads to a situation where you would want to move in an even more extreme position, and that's where we place, and that is a problem. One movement in the more hawkish extremism would be an unilateral attack. And if deterrence doesn't work, perhaps some surgical strike, I dislike this word, to North Korea may be the way to do it. The military solution quotation marks. The second one is extreme in the more status quo direction, which is to accept a nuclear North Korea. We've been trying to force North Koreans to give up their nuclear programs. It hasn't worked, so why not accept it? Freeze for freeze would be one proposal in that direction. When previous policies don't seem to be working, you go into new phases. One would be unilateral attack, the other would be accepting a nuclear North Korea. I very much disagree with both positions, and I'll tell you why. And I'd like to come out with a sort of proposal for that. And the first thing, problems that are included in the unilateral attack, an attack on North Korea. This is unlikely to destroy their retaliatory capabilities. They may change after a massive attack, but they may not. If they don't change, I don't think I have to tell you what happens to Seoul. So enough said. The second point about sanction, I very much doubt if sanctions has been totally ineffectual. But having said that, the role of China when it comes to economic sanction has been a critical one. And the traditional argument was that pushing China toward stronger sanction would be a solution, but China has been quite unwilling to accept that position. And also there has been hints about accepting a nuclear North Korea. Now, this can be a grave challenge to the region because for the following reason. One is that a nuclear North Korea would be far more independent in direction from Russia or PRC. And that could be a destabilizing factor, even aside from the fact that nuclear proliferation can be a problem and is a problem. The second point is that this would very possibly start a chain reaction in the region, that is nuclear proliferation. I do not think many Japanese citizens would accept or advocate a nuclear Japan. But I dare say that if South Korea and North Korea both are about to become nuclear powers, there is a very strong likelihood that Japan might turn into that direction. Now, there is a bit of careless talk going on in Japan right now, and I'm very unhappy about that. The argument goes, why not accepting a nuclear North Korea or nuclear South Korea, a nuclear Japan? The argument against nuclear weapons itself was a fallacy that we should cure ourselves from. That is an argument that you can see made by politicians who are not in an official position to make Japanese diplomacy, but who have held official positions in the past. It's a typical fake interpretation of international relations, but it's a simple enough one that can be accepted by some people. Accepting North Korea as a nuclear power can ignite a chain reaction in that direction. Why not having Japan a nuclear power? And that is going to destroy the whole stability of the region. I'm running out of time, so to repeat, one, I am very strongly against unilateral military attack on North Korea. I don't think I want to give a reason for that. I certainly am strongly against accepting a nuclear North Korea as well, and that leaves us with very few solutions, if I may. I am very unhappy about the Chinese reaction to the North Korean crisis. I think they have been heavy-handed, and they have been responding to signals from the United States government, or for that matter from Japan, but I think their policy direction is quite unclear at this moment. Whether they want to go along with the previous policy or they want to work together with the US or Japan for that matter, I simply don't know. And I do not see a clear line in that direction. I am also unhappy about the Abe administration in Japan right now. The Abe administration, Prime Minister Abe is a very happy man right now. He thinks that Japan has been successful in its diplomatic activities, and especially working together with the United States. Mr. Abe thinks of himself as an interpreter of Mr. Trump, as being one of the closest friends to the current President of the United States. So that's a diplomatic choice of words. Abe seems to have won the hearts and minds of the US President and to other powers who are having difficulties in negotiating with the United States. Prime Minister Abe has become a spokesman to work out relationship. Well, congratulations. The trouble is that when it comes to the relationship between North Korea and the world, the only thing Japan has been talking about was about strengthening international cooperation in face of North Korea. We should strengthen our alliance, the Western alliance with South Korea, Australia. We should work together with ASEAN nations. We should certainly bring China into the orbit and have one voice facing North Korea. It's not that I disagree with that. It's just that it's not enough at all. Just arguing about strengthening alliance structure is good, but it's insufficient. It certainly is insufficient in facing the crisis in North Korea, as we have seen already. The way Mr. Abe is interested in bringing China into the diplomatic network in facing North Korea is also highly ambiguous at this moment. I do not think Japan is interested in bullying China at this moment. I would dare say that Prime Minister Abe is actually working out a relationship with Mr. Xi Jinping. But having said that, when it comes to North Korea, I simply don't see anything at work at this moment. Now, what should be done? Luckily, I'm running out of time, so the solution is going to be very short. One is that the focus is about bringing China into the orbit, not only on economic sanctions, but also on geopolitical framework. North Korea is a liability for the security of PRC. And for that, not only strengthening the economic sanction against North Korea, but a larger Chinese role in facing the possible crisis from DPRK would be critical, and that includes potential use of force. I assume that PRC, China is very strongly against an unilateral attack on North Korea. But if that is the case, then China should work together for other powers. Now, bringing China into the orbit would be one. And that would lead to an even broader framework facing North Korea. It's going to take time, but we don't have time. The second point is about offering North Korea an olive branch. I'm aware that I sound crazy in saying this, but this is about threatening North Korea with stronger economic sanctions and even possible military actions. We do have to propose a scheme that North Korea can accept in the future, and that would be about ending the continuous war in the Korean Peninsula, and on that we do need a framework for that. I may sound to be idealistic and hopelessly pacifist in saying that, but I dare say that we do not have a structure that allows security in the long future in the Korean Peninsula. And this is something that was the objective of the six-party talks, and I agree with John, Professor Aitkenberry, that this is something we have to bring in to our discussion. We have to be more adventurous. We have to be more adventurous. A previous policy of deterrence, previous policy of economic sanctions alone would not work, but we should also be careful not to accelerate our action toward simply accepting how it is in North Korea, or simply expecting the results of an unilateral attack. We have to be more adventurous in our diplomatic initiative. We should be more adventurous in inviting China into this architecture. And Mr. Abe should not be simply happy about having a good relationship with neighboring countries, best of all the United States. Thank you.
You mentioned that if South and North Korea go nuclear, and then Japan might be prone to be nuclear. In that case, even though my government made clear that we will not go to nuclear as of now, but hypothetical base, when everybody have some great cannot guarantee the reliability of the extended deterrence of the United States. Going nuclear in South Korea might be another hard issue. But in that case, legally speaking, everybody, all international society recognize the dire situation of South Korea, so which means that some prerequisite for the withdrawal of NPT, which is stipulated in the Article 10 of the NPT, satisfied. But in case of Japan, I have a little doubt. The situation that Korean Peninsula situation could a good excuse to satisfy the Article 10 of NPT, which allow the withdrawal of the NPT.
I think I agree with everybody that the situation on North Korea, for the peninsula, has become more dangerous. Crisis can occur, at least in 4 kinds of scenarios. One is a failed nuclear test. Okay. I mean, North Korea has stepped up with nuclear tests and also missile tests. The failed nuclear test can be disastrous. Okay. Given the backward facilities they are using to test nuclear weapons, some people argue that this is just a matter of time. Okay. Another scenario is increased international sanctions on North Korea. Okay. Here we are, because of North Korea's nuclear program and tests and also missile tests, the international society has stepped up with sanctions against North Korea. Actually, some people are demanding China to cut off oil for North Korea. That could induce a crisis in North Korea, right? People are against a military option for fear that this would touch off a crisis in North Korea, and also some kind of a irrational response on the part of North Korea. But a UN-sanctioned induced crisis can also spark up that kind of situation. The third kind of scenario is political struggle within North Korea. That may produce a crisis. Okay? Given the sanctions and given the possibility of war, I don't think the leadership in North Korea is that united in thinking. So, I mean, one cannot rule out the possibility that there is a serious policy difference, and then something may happen. We don't know. We don't know much about the inside story of North Korea. But he did kill his brother, so things could happen. The fourth scenario in which a crisis can occur is U.S. initiated preemptive strike. Okay. That, of course, would unleash a crisis situation, definitely. So now we are facing a situation in which a crisis can occur, and the chance for that to happen has dramatically increased in recent years. Okay. Now, what can we do about it? I think the first thing we should do it immediately, is to hold dialogues on contingency plans. Okay. Every concerned party has a contingency plan with regard to how to deal with the crisis. Okay. But But the problem is, so far, their plans have not been shared and coordinated. Okay? And I think that's very dangerous. Okay? For example, China and the US, they should have contingency plans about how to control the North Korea's nuclear weapons if a crisis occurs. Okay? Right? Because you cannot leave it unmanaged or in the hands of a North Korean officer whose boss may be in trouble. So that's very dangerous. So somehow you need to take care of the nuclear facilities to make sure that that officer will not push the button, or the nuclear weapons may be taken away by some other forces. But the problem is, without talking to each other beforehand to make sure that the militaries, the Chinese military and the American military don't bump into each other in the crisis, you need to talk to each other before before that happens. I think neither the U.S. nor China probably would regard taking possession of North Korea as such an attractive thing to do. I mean, you cannot learn anything from their nuclear technology, and of course, you have to pay a lot to take care of. The cost is can be quite high. And China and South Korea should also, China and South Korea and the U.S. should hold dialogues about the crisis. If crisis occurs, what are we going to do about restoring the order in North Korea as quickly as possible to reduce the damage of a crisis, of unfolding military conflicts? Okay? Who should do the job? Okay? And these are the things that we should talk about. And how about refugee problems? Okay, the North Korean refugees would not cross the 38th parallel because that's a very dangerous zone. You have a lot of landmines, so they would go to China. Okay, but then if you have a large influx of refugees, it's better to think about ways to accommodate them and to make sure that to avoid a so-called humanitarian disaster. And then the five parties should have their own dialogue about post-crisis arrangement for North Korea and also probably for the Korean Peninsula. Okay, how are we going to have a new government for North Korea? Okay, or should we have a new government for North Korea, or should we have a united Korea? This thing should be discussed so that we know where we are going when crisis occurs. Talk about contingency plan is necessary, and we should do it as soon as possible. Okay. So far, I think there are talks about it at track 2 and track 1.5. But then I think the discussion, the consultation, should take place at a much more substantive level between the concerned authorities. The second thing I think we need to do, okay, is to get prepared for a military conflict. Okay. I think, given the 4 scenarios which I just mentioned, okay, a military conflict can happen. The chance for that to happen has dramatically increased. Of course, we all wish that it would not happen. Okay, we hope to have a peaceful solution. Okay, but the problem is it can happen. Okay, so we need to devise various kinds of measures to reduce the damage to avoid the loss of life as much as possible. Okay? So that probably would include seriously considering evacuation of civilians from areas adjacent to the North Korea border, okay? Because those people there are most likely to be affected. This includes, I mean, all countries probably concerned should take this thing very seriously. The third thing probably we need to do is to develop a enhanced version of carrot and stick approach. We should maintain the current level of sanctions, and also if North Korea continues with the tests of nuclear weapons and especially and missiles, probably we should continue to increase the sanctions. And of course, holding dialogues on contingency plans can also be a form of pressure on North Korea. So we should make the stick stronger and bigger. Yeah. At the same time, we should also develop a more attractive package of incentives for North Korea to change course. Okay, that is now what I can think of is probably normalization of relations between North Korea and concerned countries, especially the U.S. The U.S. and North Korea do not have diplomatic relations. Probably it's time for the U.S. to offer diplomatic relations if North Korea can give up nuclear weapons. Okay. The second thing is a promise a promise not to undertake any actions to effect a sort of regime change. I mean, repeated promise. I mean, the U.S. has suggested that already. But then, this probably should be given in a more forceful way and probably by the international community as a whole, if North Korea can give up nuclear weapons. Okay. The third thing is, probably we should also give North Korea a security guarantee. In other words, we'll make sure that no country, again, another commitment not to allow any country to invade North Korea. If North Korea gives up nuclear weapons, if that's the security concern it's worried about. And finally, probably we should come up with a big package, of economic assistance for North Korea, okay, to help it to get integrated with the international economic order, and to encourage it to conduct reforms, and then, in a way, to have a better life. So by adopting an enhanced carrot and stick approach, we try to change the incentive structure on the part of North Korea, so that we'll find it more attractive to abandon the nuclear weapons in favor of some kind of a deal with the international community to have a secure and also more prosperous future laying ahead. I hope that they will see the light and take the option. Let me stop here. Thank you.
As the last speaker, my ideas have already been exhausted by my previous speakers. Nevertheless, I will try to add some more. As you know, North Korea is pursuing nuclear ICBM capable of hitting the mainland of the United States. As you know, they have already deployed almost 1,000 ballistic missiles around the country, targeting South Korea and Japan. And they are now moving into the stage of deploying IRBMs, intermediate range ballistic missiles, the range of which includes Guam, which is the hub of U.S. military strategy of the Asia Pacific. When North Korea succeeds in developing nuclear ICBMs, I think you may agree that will be a really serious game changer, primarily because U.S.-led alliances in Northeast Asia will be seriously threatened. Then U.S.-provided nuclear umbrella will not be fully trusted by U.S. key allies, such as ROK and Japan. Against this backdrop, I think Kim Jong-un's game plan is as follows. From the North Korean point of view, North Korea, first of all, should accelerate the miniaturization of nuclear warheads and ICBMs. And secondly, North Korea may return to quote-unquote tactical dialogue, not strategic dialogue, with U.S., South Korea, when North Korea seriously suffers from international pressure. Thirdly, but North Korea will resume nuclear and missile development programs when that pressure is reduced, is eased. Fourthly, North Korea will declare at some point a moratorium on nuclear and missile tests right after North Korea has accomplished its strategic mission, which means the successful development of nuclear ICBMs. And then North Korea will come to the negotiating table and pretend to negotiate over denuclearization while at the same time consolidating the stability of the Kim Jong-un regime. By the way, in light of the rapidly deteriorating situation of the North Korean nuclear crisis, it is not a surprise for the South Korean media and opinion leaders to suspect the reliability of U.S. extended deterrence for South Korea as well as for Japan. The ROK government at the moment is strengthening so-called PGM, precision-guided munitions capability, such as cruise missiles and ballistic missile capabilities. And also, the current government is accelerating so-called three-axis system, which consists of kill chain, KAMD, and KMPR. The kill chain refers to kind of a preemptive strike capability, and the KMD is a Korean air and missile defense system, and the KMPR is kind of a massive retaliatory system after being attacked by North Korea. However, this kind of so-called three-axis system is based on conventional weapons, not weapons of mass destruction, such as nuclear weapons or chemical or biological weapons. Then the next question is whether North Korea will be intimidated by this three-axis system, whether North Korea will be deterred by this conventional deterrence and defense system. Although South Korea deterrence and defense system is supported by U.S. provided nuclear deterrence and defense capabilities. Former UK Defense Secretary Dennis Healey said in his memoir that during the Cold War, it takes only 5% of credibility of American retaliation to deter Russians, but 95% to reassure the European allies. If South Korean people are not assured by the United States about its extended deterrence, they will demand the ROK government to take one of the following three options, I think. The first, the completion of nuclear fuel cycle while relying on US-provided extended deterrence. The second option, redeployment of US tactical nuclear weapons back to South Korea. Third, South Korea's nuclear armament. Anyhow, at some point, when the maximum pressure works, North Korea will come to the negotiating table for tactical purposes, as I enumerated about North Korea's game plan. By the way, our mission, nevertheless, is transform this tactical dialogue. I think we have to accept it, even if it appears to be tactical. We have to transform the tactical dialogue into a strategic dialogue so that North Korea may not move to the next stage of its game plan. To that end, we need to agree on, as Jia Jing-kuo already mentioned, and also Kiichi Fujiwara already pointed out eloquently, we need to agree on what we can, what we can demand and what we can give to North Korea beforehand. So that's why we need to come up with a kind of a common roadmap that will be imposed on or negotiated with North Korea when North Korea comes to the tactical dialogue at some point in the future. In conclusion, our policy should be aimed at quote-unquote regime transformation, if not regime change. Regime transformation is different from regime change, and it refers to the promotion of changes in the North Korean behavior. As you know, North Korea is a very unique country in the sense that their regime security, many of our panelists talked about regime security. Their regime security is located higher than their national security. The security of Kim Jong-un regime, the security of Kim dynasty, that takes the first priority. The North Korea policy should be focused on regime transformation of North Korea, which means changing the behavior of the North Korean regime by strengthening the regime security of Kim Jong-un. Only when Kim Jong-un perceives its own nuclear development as choking his own regime, then he will be able to come to the negotiating table. So that's why we have to weaken his regime security to that extent, if not regime change. However, if our regime transformation policy does not work out any tangible results, we need to increase our pressure further, and also we need to think about Plan B, as Jia Jing-kuo already hinted out. Interestingly, as you may recall, Dr. Henry Kissinger, through his Wall Street Journal op-ed last August, proposed a corollary US-China understanding on the aftermath, especially about North Korea's political evolution and deployment restraints on the territory of North Korea. That means, I think, the replacement of the current North Korean leader with a new leader who will give up nuclear weapons development programs, while, by the way, maintaining the current North Korean system. This will be, as you can guess, will be an extremely risky option, but things, I'm afraid, could move toward the direction when the key stakeholders, particularly the United States and China, are frustrated enough. So, in order to avoid this kind of dangerous scenarios, I think the key stakeholders, particularly United States, China, and ROK, should embark upon strategic dialogue, as Jachinko named it as a strategic dialogue, or the contingency dialogue among themselves at track 1 as well as track 1.5 level. So it can be aimed at consolidating our North Korea policy and assessing the effect of our sanctions and other policy measures. In addition, we can discuss the future of the Korean Peninsula, although it depends on how much China can open her mind. So on that cautiously pessimistic note, let me stop there. Thank you.